conflicts going on around the world, some of them in the headlines every day, such as in Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan as well, where people are dying not just because they are involved in the fighting, but also because food supplies are not getting through to them, health supplies are not getting through to them, and also sometimes they are taking place in areas where there are natural disasters as well. So there are floods, there are droughts, and often other natural phenomenon like earthquakes. So the reason we've gathered this panel here today is to talk about this issue and how the delivery of aid can be improved, what lessons can be learned going forward. And we've got a panel here with quite a wide range of experience and expertise to look at this from a whole range of different angles. So working from closest to me along the line, we have, first of all, Akif Çağatay Kilic, who is the Chief Advisor to the Turkish President on Foreign Policy and Security. Then next to him is Ali Youssef Ahmed Al-Sharif, who is the Foreign Minister of Sudan. He's also the former ambassador to the European Union, China, and South Africa. We have next to him Jagan Chapagain, who is the Secretary General and CEO of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. And also at the end, last but not least, is Tamara Al-Rifai, who is the Director of External Relations and Communications for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which is an organization which was set up specifically to help Palestinian refugees. So I thought I'd start off by just asking the panelists about the specific issue of these complex crises, and in particular to start off with Jagan Chapagain, because his organization has dealt with a lot of different situations in the past. And maybe he could explain to us, first of all, about the different kinds of complex crises and the things that maybe we don't think about, because I think a lot of people think that there's conflicts cause these to become more complex, but maybe there are other factors as well. Perhaps areas where a government is not in complete control of the country or the area where it's happening, not necessarily through conflict, but because it is not capable of doing that. But maybe you could explain a bit more, please, sir.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for this very good attendance. I was a bit worried that by 6 o'clock we will have more empty hall. It's almost full, so it shows the huge interest on this topic from the participants of ADF. When we talk about the complexities of the crisis, I think we have to look from the two angles. One angle is each of the crises in themselves are complex these days. We were just talking to the minister earlier in Sudan. But there is another aspect that the many crises have also now become the congruent of multiple crises. So in the same place, so you cannot quite say that this is a natural disaster, or this is a conflict, or this is just an earthquake. You cannot say that anymore. And unfortunately, a lot of times what's also happening is in the middle of the conflict environment, also the more and more quote-unquote natural disasters are also taking place. And it sort of complexifies the situation itself, and it makes the response extremely, extremely difficult. In the middle of that, of course, for various reasons, there has also been the geopolitics involved these days. So you cannot always see a humanitarian situation purely from the humanitarian angle. There is a geopolitics involved. And the involvement of the geopolitics makes sometimes the response extremely difficult and complicated. But it also creates a massive disparity depending on where the conflict is taking place or where the crisis is happening. As you can see, and I can see in my own organization, that depending on the geopolitical importance of the crisis, you get a different type of response. And I was just sharing with the minister from Sudan this morning that it's been extremely difficult to bring the attention to what is happening in Sudan and what are the humanitarian challenges. So each individual crisis is complex. And I try to sort of look at this into as, when we see the complexity, we see the congruent of, for example, the health crisis, the diseases coming. At the same time, you see the increased disasters. A lot of them linked to climate. You see a massive displacement because of the disasters and the health crisis and the food insecurity situation in many countries. You have increased displacement. And when you have increased displacement, it also creates a geopolitical tension, as you have seen in different parts of the world. And there is, of course, a massive disparity on the wealth, but also disparity on how different crises are treated by the donors. And finally, when this happens, and I had an unfortunate reality of witnessing some of the situations where there is so much despair that people have reached a point, the gut punch, that there is no future. There is no hope anymore. So we are really living in this really complex environment. And the sad part of this is, if we look at the wealth that exists in the world today, the technological innovation we have seen in the world today, the progress in the health. So when you look, this must be the best time to be living in this world, when you look everything. Despite that, we see the increased humanitarian crisis, more people needing humanitarian assistance, and massive disparity and who gets the support and who doesn't. And I think this is a huge challenge for an organization like us.
You mentioned the country of Sudan. We've got the foreign minister of Sudan here with us today. And there's a war going on there we all know about. And a few weeks ago, the Sudanese military retook the capital, Khartoum. So I'm wondering if Mr. Al-Sharif can just give us an idea of what the situation is like in the capital there now, and what it needs, what the situation is regards aid there, the infrastructure and such like.
Let me start by, because this is the first time that I speak in this conference, let me thank the leadership and the government and the people of Turkey, particularly the region and the town where we are now, for hosting us. This is very generous, it is very, very genuine, and we felt that we were home. I must say, Sudan is an example of a complex crisis. I think it's a model that can be studied, because the crisis in Sudan, the war in the Sudan, it has two important elements. One is an internal one, which is the competition between the National Army of Sudan and what was called the RSF, which is a paramilitary organization that was formed early in 2003 to combat the rebels of Darfur, who were fighting at that time the central government. And this, you know, it created the emergence of this group from a specific tribal background of so-called Arabic origin against the local communities and in many parts of Darfur who were of African tribes of African origin. This has created a very sensitive and very a situation where tensions and fear and you know, tribal sort of you know, when somebody is killed from your tribe, you want to go and fight the other tribe and kill more of them, and you know, this it became a very in Darfur very difficult situation, very complex situation. And then this group of the paramilitary group moved to the center. It was created by unfortunately by the ruling elite at that time to defend certain interests and security interests and so on. And then this group of soldiers who are who are not part of the national army and who started gaining more and more power and more modern military equipments, modern everything. And they started actually becoming important to various local and regional actors, including the EU. And I said this 2 days ago when we were having what is called the Khartoum process regarding the migration and so on. I said the EU at one stage helped this group, gave them over 200 million euros, so that they stop what is normally called illegal immigration to Europe, and by stopping people from coming from Ethiopia and Eritrea and so on, going through Sudan to Libya or to Egypt and then across the Mediterranean to Europe. So they were given money to work for this purpose, and then they were taken to Yemen, to fight in the war in Yemen, and also against big amounts of money. So this group became very prominent, very important, very powerful. And then I think the leader of this group started, now the regional element of the complexity of the problem. His own ambitions coincided with the ambitions of a regional player. We don't want to mention names because we respect the humanitarian part of this gathering and so on. One of the regional actors, those who used this power, this military power in Yemen, they wanted to use it by staging a coup in the Sudan and holding power in their hands. And then Sudan has very important strategic, geographical and strategic elements. The Red Sea, a very vast area that is cultivable, that it can be important in food security and so on. So this led to foreign agenda with local agenda, and the crisis, the war that started in Sudan became a very serious war. And now you have asked me about Khartoum, and can tell you that Khartoum was destroyed in such a way that somebody wanted to wipe Khartoum out of the map and wanted to eliminate a specific, what they called the 1956 state. 1956 is the independence of Zaire. So they wanted to eliminate, to get rid of this history, of the people who are ruling in the name of this state, those who governed Sudan after 1956, after its independence. So this became a very complex crisis, a very complex, and the destruction was immense. It was, something that you wouldn't imagine, that people will go to the National Museum of a country which was full of historic monuments and historic, I don't know, those of you who visited Sudan would know what I'm talking about. And now there is nothing in the National Museum, as if somebody wanted to eradicate the history of Sudan. And not only the National Museum, but all the museums that were found there. The basic infrastructure, the hospitals, the schools, the houses of the people. Leave alone the violations of human rights and the killing of people, the raping of women, the killing of children, the killing of old men. And it's something that even in a terror movie or horror movie, or I don't know, nobody could imagine the magnitude of what was happening for the Sudanese people. So in a nutshell, I would say massive destruction, very systematic. It is meant to rub out the name of Sudan from the map of Africa. So what happened in a couple of days, couple of weeks before now, a couple of weeks ago, is that the Sudanese armed forces, which, you know, many allegations are made against the armed forces, false allegations, managed to recapture Khartoum. And Khartoum, for those who know Sudan, it's a city, 3 cities in one as a capital: Khartoum, Khartoum North, and Omdurman. Is almost 100% captured. Very few pockets in Omdurman, and now they are fighting them. Most of the soldiers left Khartoum, but I take this opportunity to warn that we are going to face a disaster in Darfur, because those who left Khartoum from the RSF, the remnants of RSF, are now heading to Darfur, and they are heading to Al-Fashir. Al-Fashir is the capital of Darfur. They were attacking this city many times before. They failed to enter it. But now they have gathered all their forces and they are heading to Darfur. And you will hear about even a more difficult humanitarian situation in Darfur. I'm telling you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Al-Sharif. Tamara Al-Rifai, to you now. Just your organization recently been banned by Israel. We'll probably get onto that in a short while, but can you just give us a sense of the problems your organization has had getting supplies into Gaza, but also other parts of Palestine as well?
Thank you, Andrew, and my heart was nearly melting at hearing about Sudan. I lived there for 2 years, and I really hope that things will be restored. In fact, I hope things will be restored everywhere, because everywhere we're looking, in the region in particular, the humanitarian situation seems dire. UNRWA works in 5 fields of operations. It works in the occupied Palestinian territory, so the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan, with a primary objective of providing or contributing to the human development of Palestinian refugees until the day there's a political solution and they are no longer refugees. But because this is a region that is very often hit by conflicts and fairly regularly by natural disasters, UNRWA switches on to become a humanitarian responder every time there's a humanitarian situation. And so nowhere is that confluence between a conflict, an acute humanitarian situation, and layers of hardship because of occupation, because of the blockade. Nowhere is it more obvious than in Gaza, especially after 18 months of the conflict we have all seen. So no one can pretend we didn't see. You asked about what we do or the challenges. Let me start with the positive. In 6 weeks of a ceasefire, it was very obvious that when there's a political will, there's a way to flood Gaza with food, clean water, tents, and items and commercial items. UNRWA, because it is the largest humanitarian actor in Gaza, was able to reach 2 million people. That's the entirety of the Gazan population with food during the 6 weeks of a ceasefire. We were able to bring back 50,000 children to some kind of learning in shelters, so no proper schooling. Most of our installations, most of our buildings have been destroyed during the war, or if they are still in a condition that allows us to use them, they have become shelters, and we brought back 50,000 children to learning. So there was a glimmer of hope during these 6 weeks of ceasefire in Gaza, which is now shattered, that glimmer of hope, since the 2nd of March, with 100 children on average reportedly killed every day, and a complete closure to humanitarian assistance. What are we doing about it? In the 6 weeks of ceasefire, we did manage to bring in an amount of aid, food and non-food, that has allowed us to last until a couple of weeks ago. However, we are back today in Gaza to the very alarming hunger indicators, public health hazards indicators of the worst at the peak of the conflict before the ceasefire. I say this because while we see the destruction, 92% of the housing units in Gaza are reportedly destroyed, 95% of the hospital network is no longer functioning, and on average, a Gazan has been displaced in search of safety, although nowhere is safe in Gaza, 6 times, but up to 19 times during this conflict. In that situation, what can be done now other than huge advocacy efforts in order to instill back a ceasefire, and we've seen that it's possible, and to allow aid in? We at UNRWA spoke of the weaponization of aid, because what we saw in Gaza was that aid was used to exercise pressure on the Gazans, on Hamas, for the negotiations and for hostages. And as a reminder, and that is my ICRC background, but as a humanitarian, it is absolutely forbidden in the strongest terms in international humanitarian law to use aid as a weapon, and that is what we saw in Gaza. And so to this crowd, and I'm very impressed of the size of the crowd who wants to hear about humanitarian response in complex crises, as a community, we need to keep the pressure and to publicly communicate about the humanitarian imperative, the nature of any humanitarian response that belongs to the Red Cross, Red Crescent family, or the UN, being a neutral one that doesn't take sides and that has to remain active and cannot be prevented because of political or negotiations, political reasons or negotiations.
Akif Çağatay Kilic, your government, the Turkish government, got a history of sending humanitarian aid to different parts of the world in recent years, places such as Somalia, Afghanistan and Gaza. I'm just wondering if you tell us a bit about the problems your government has in trying to get aid into some of these places where there are these complex crises going on.
I mean, I think first of all, after what Tamara just put down in the room, the figures, I think, speak for itself. There is, when we're talking about humanitarian aid, there is man-made, in that sense, human-made disasters, and there's natural disasters, as we call them. The natural disasters implies that a disaster is natural. Anything that we just heard, or all the summarization of what we just heard, was that human-made disasters are, I think, the worst. Because when we are referring to natural disasters, we can say there is no personal motivation behind it. It unfortunately is hitting everybody who is being hit as a person in the same way. But the disasters that we're talking about these days, and that you are asking me about, are in such a way discriminatory that they decide and take the decision on which part, geographically, but at the same time, which kind or whereabouts in which people will suffer. I think that's the worst part that we're trying to address. And it's not only the number of people in this room at this time, I think it's also the composition that is important. I think I can say, when I was addressing rooms like this in my first years of this work, I was saying, like the youngsters in there as I am, and now I can say I'm a middle-aged person, and this room is younger than most of us here, I think, sitting predominantly, and this gives hope. There was a reference made to hope. We can try to rebuild the figures. We can try to ease the suffering, but easing the suffering is not getting rid of it. When you're saying 95% of the hospital infrastructure in Gaza is destroyed, 16 times people have been displaced. I really can't understand sometimes when we're talking to, and I have to be careful here because I'm holding a position where, in my position, in the place of responsibility, things that I say can reflect on political decision-making processes. But the human side of it is absolutely devastating. There's always this quote, if it's one death, it's important. If it's 2, 3, it's still bigger. But after a certain number, you're just statistics. And we are very easily saying, so and so many thousand people have been displaced, so many thousand people have been wounded, and so many thousand people have died. When we're talking to our children, when we're talking to people that we are trying to educate or be part in for their future, we are saying, what's the worst thing that can happen to you? The answer is death. There's, of course, in philosophy, a different approach to death. I'm not talking about that. But if you go into an ordinary person in the street and ask him or her, what's the worst thing that can happen to you? 95% of it will be death. We are talking about death. It's just a number. More than 50,000 people have been killed in Gaza. Probably 30,000 of them children. So when we're talking about humanitarian aid in crisis or in complex crisis, we have to address the cause and the root of it. Because otherwise, we have the capability as governments, as states, as the world, to produce humanitarian aid material, whatever you need. Construction material, food, basic shelter, housing, whatever you want to call it. We can produce this. We have the capability as the human race and our technology to do this. But really, do we need to do this? Do we have to do this? Because a man-made produced, not created, produced crisis, because creation, in my view, is reserved for the creator, a produced crisis shouldn't be even there. And shouldn't we put our energy in finding solutions before these crises happen? Otherwise, I can give you figures that Turkey has been under the leadership of our president since more than 15 years now. Number one in aid work to people who need it, sheltering people, also putting forward humanitarian aid capabilities and capacities. It's much, much higher compared to some countries who have a bigger economy than we have. But traditionally, the Turkish people and also the governments of Turkey, whenever there was, but especially under President Erdogan, we have put out a lot of this help. But like I said, I think the question that we have to answer and work on is not if we ban Tamar's organization to go into Gaza or other places, or for that matter, the Red Crescent, Red Cross to go into Africa, different places in Africa. I have been to Sudan as well. The problem that we had when we went there, when President Erdogan was prime minister, was the numbers and figures that were put forward in humanitarian aid put on the ground did not match with what we were seeing. There's another aspect that we have to look into, and that is the administration of this aid, whether you want to call it humanitarian aid or crisis management aid or whatever. Because unfortunately, our tendencies to get bureaucratically tangled up in issues has also come over to humanitarian work. We are getting lost in bureaucracy and the finances that bureaucracy is eating up, and we're not able to give the total financial aid on the ground where it's needed because it's eaten up by the red tape. Just one example, and I'll finish there. During my time as minister, I had the European Union, it's not the aid fund, but support fund. They wanted to build a technical school room in my hometown in Samsun in Turkey. We said, fine, I mean, if it's a very noble cause, helping students to learn better in a technical environment. The figures were about 150,000 euros for one sort of laboratory with computers and things like that. In the end, we had to, as the ministry, help the school to actually reach the numbers that they wanted to reach, because about 50% of that aid which came from the European Union was eaten up by the bureaucratic frameworks and work that had to be done. So only 75,000, around 75,000 euros reached actually the school. So this is another aspect that we have to reconsider, how we apply this aid that we are producing. But I think the main question is, shouldn't we work towards a world where we don't have to find aid for human-produced crises, but only try to find aid which are naturally, unfortunately, caused, where we have to help the human beings.
Thank you very much. I'm a bit conscious of time. We've been asked to finish a little bit earlier, and also we started a little bit late because of the previous session. But I wanted to give everybody another sort of chance to address a couple of issues, really, which you've already touched on there, is how this delivery of aid can be improved in the future, particularly as one of the issues with stopping it being delivered properly is conflict, and conflict has been around since man has been alive, basically, and we've never solved that. So how do you get around this situation? And also the other issue about neutrality, about how aid can be delivered in a kind of neutral way, which may be of particular interest to the two panelists at the end there. Particularly the International Federation, the Red Cross, Red Crescent is well known for this neutral stance, but may still get criticism on this score. And also the United Nations Relief and Work Agency there has been made a banned organization by Israel. Israel says it's biased. So I wonder if maybe we could maybe start with Tamara at the end and come this way, and you can reply to those issues as you see fit, just with a couple of minutes for each, please.
Thanks for bringing this up. So UNRWA is a UN agency, and by nature, it abides by the regulatory framework and the principles of the UN, namely humanity, neutrality, impartiality, etc. And that's something we do not compromise on. Having said that, there has been a pretty consistent disinformation campaign against UNRWA for a few years by the government of Israel, and by extension by lobby groups that support the claims of the government of Israel that UNRWA is not a neutral agency. And this allegation came to a head after the 7th of October attacks, when suddenly there were allegations by the government of Israel that some of the UNRWA staff had been implicated in the attacks. We took it extremely seriously. The UN Secretary General opened an investigation on UNRWA, but we also reminded the government of Israel, which is our counterpart, because our headquarters used to be in East Jerusalem, because there are now Israeli laws that ban the work of UNRWA there, that every year we do share the list of all our staff with the government every year, in order to be transparent, and if there are any concerns, then we expect the government, the government, to share them with us, and we had never received any complaints before that. Now, what we have noticed during the 18 months conflict in Gaza is that campaign has really intensified. It has intensified so much as to see billboards on 2nd Avenue in New York, 1st and 2nd Avenues in New York near the UN, and in several of our donor capitals paid for by the government of Israel, equating UNRWA to a terrorist organization. This for us is misinformation, disinformation, and mostly it is extremely disingenuous, vis-a-vis an agency that has been there for 75 years, is the largest, runs 700 schools for 500,000 children in the region, and it's an organization that will be part of a political solution. Because once there's a political solution, you spoke about, Mr. Advisor spoke about youth, all these young people that have gone through the excellent education of UNRWA are the future leaders of Palestine. They are the future intellectual, commercial, economic elite of Palestine. The impeccable health system that UNRWA sets, 100% vaccination rate, etc. This is a population that will be part of, is part now of the Palestinian population, but once there's a political solution, UNRWA will hand over an entire community of Palestine refugees that has received excellent standards. And in order to do that, we have been demonstrating over and over again that we are a principled UN agency.
Jagan, how about you now?
No, thank you so much. Maybe let me start from the comment from the advisor talking about the humanitarian response and having to actually address the root causes. And I fully agree with you. I think somehow in last number of years, because the political system of finding solutions hasn't been functioning very well. If we look at the crisis of the world now, start from Afghanistan, now, the assumption is Afghanistan situation is over. It's not. In multiple crises that we have seen in the world, the political system hasn't been able to find the political solutions. That means the root causes are not being addressed. Because of that, somehow the responsibility has been increasingly shifted to the humanitarian actors, whose mandate is not to find the political solution. The humanitarian intervention is always about alleviating the human suffering and frankly buying time so that the political solution can be found. So sometimes you hear the criticism of the humanitarian actors saying that, oh, they haven't done their job, because it's not their job to find the political solutions. So I think that's where we need to put a huge emphasis around finding a political solution. And that's where I think the topic of this forum becomes very important, the diplomacy. And as we have seen lately, that somehow the diplomacy has become a dirty word. Talking to the people you disagree with has become a dirty word. Somehow now that we want to have a negotiation with people we already agree with. We don't want to discuss with the people we don't agree with. So when you don't talk to the people you don't agree with, there is no political solution. So that's why I think this forum becomes so important, and it's the first time I'm joining here because I think somehow the diplomacy needs to be promoted. And for us internally, and the humanitarian sector, the humanitarian diplomacy becomes extremely important. And maybe, Tamara, I think in the Red Cross Red Crescent movement, we have a slightly opposite problem of you. And I see my colleague Pierre Criumble here, Director General of ICRC, in the audience. I think we get criticized for being neutral. Sometimes we get criticized for not taking sides. And for us, I think extremely important is the history of the Red Cross Red Crescent movement and the unique role different components of the movement play. I think extremely important that we uphold those principles. However difficult it is, however much we are criticized, because these are critical to maintain the access to some of the difficult area, to do some of the sensitive work like my colleagues do from the ICRC, visiting the prisons, helping to transfer the hostages. These are very complex operations. And for that, the upholding the principles is extremely important. And we are quite strong on this, despite some of the criticism we receive. Now, it's also extremely important that the humanitarian response, especially during the complex environment, must be integrated. And I was a little bit smiling when you talk about the bureaucracy, and we face that every day. But there is also the system that has been built of very vertically working, vertical financing. I don't want to be political here, but just a few months ago, we celebrated the polio vaccination in Gaza. And we supported, our member, Palestine Red Crescent, was actively involved in that process. But some of the story I heard was breaking my heart. If a mother is bringing a sick child, a malnourished child, for a polio drop, so the child gets the polio drop, but no support on malnutrition. Because the funding is so vertical, the funding is provided for polio drops. And that voluntary staff is paid to provide the polio drop. And the mother's question was, so you think that my child should not die of polio, but it's okay to die from malnutrition? Of course, this is a very strong example, but we see the bureaucracy that have been built, which doesn't allow the humanitarian funding to be used in a much more flexible way by the humanitarian actors who are working on the ground, who know the reality. That's been a huge challenge. So because the issues are integrated, so the response have to be integrated. For example, I mean, maybe I will a little bit build on what you said. When you say natural disaster, now the natural disasters are no longer natural in many sense. Because when there is an earthquake, and if the construction haven't been done meeting the earthquake standards, that's the human contribution to making the impact of earthquake much worse. The similar thing with how we are using our natural resources that creates the drought or the floods. So now even the natural disasters are no longer purely natural because humans are contributing from various reasons, sometimes probably for good reasons, sometimes not so, for good reasons.
Jagan, I'm going to have to stop you there because I'm being asked to wrap up. Some of the panel have got other engagements.
If you give me 1 minute, I will just mention 2 points.
Sure.
The second point, third point I want to mention is the anticipatory action. I think we got to anticipate and take action beforehand. We can do that. There is science now. And then finally, we believe absolutely that a lot of the humanitarian response must be led by locally. Because the first responders are always local actors. I saw that during the Turkey earthquake here. The international assistance, however fast it is, takes days to come. So that's why localizing the response and locally led action is absolutely clear, especially in the complex environment. I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Jagan. Once again, I apologize for the curtailing of this session, but hopefully you've still managed to get an understanding, a bit more information from the wide range of experience we've had on here on the panel tonight. And hopefully I'd like to ask you to give them a round of applause for their contributions this evening. Thank you very much for all your time this evening, for coming here and sharing this experience. For me, I learned a lot as well from the discussion, so thank you very much to all of you.